The forecasting. Go. All right, here we are, starting with forecasting. And here we go. All right, let's check the buoys right now. I can tell everybody right now out in Rockaway, it's super windy and not from the correct direction for making surf. So yeah, there it is. 3.9 feet at 4 seconds from the northwest. Yeah, it is howling out here right now. I guess there's a 1 foot at 9 seconds from the south southeast, fighting against 5.2 at 5 from the west northwest. So yeah, that's grim for anybody looking to surf around here anytime soon. Just check the local weather, see what these winds are doing out here. Of course, I figured since I booked the trip that it would be firing here. It looks like the winds are going to calm down overnight. So if there's any of that south swell left, there could be a sneaky wave here and there. Saturday looks like that same pattern again. Basically, storm comes in and then gets blown right off. We can look at it on the wind finder too. Yeah, just extremely strong offshore winds through the night, Saturday night into Sunday. Monday, the winds chill out quite a bit. And then Tuesday, it's the storm forecast again with storming into Wednesday. And then that cycle kicks in, but not as hard winds so far. This is a whole week out. So maybe right when I get back, there will be a little bit of a wave, just judging by the wind reports. Let's see what wind finder looks like. I'll show you guys a cool feature of the forecast that I'm going into right now. Yeah, so I don't think that anything's getting in past that. I mean, always worth a look if you're super desperado, I suppose. But yeah, just pushing off the coast. Looks like Morocco is getting waves. And then the islands would be getting waves to be a north swell for them because it's circling down. Yeah, and then Friday night, here's when those Saturday winds start to kick up. So there's this little local storm on Saturday. There it is. And Morocco and Portugal getting another swell. And then Sunday, there's that flow again, pushing it away. It doesn't look as strong. There's this ridge here, so slight possibility for surf out here on Sunday. Just leave it at 10 a.m. See what it looks like for the rest of the week. Monday, not looking good. Tuesday, here's that flow that I said we saw coming in. There's a storm in the middle of the Atlantic moving out. So Tuesday, winds coming in. That looks pretty promising. Yeah, this is actually the Wednesday that I get back, and the Thursday I get back, there's this little system and the wind's not too hard. So maybe in a week from now, if this holds, that'll work out for surfing on the East Coast. Just keep your eyes peeled if you're desperate. Sounds like you got some time, Roger. And then, so just to show you guys the forecast, this is the swell that is creating the waves at the Haleiwa contest. Wait, no, we're right now. There's Hawaii, so it must be this that's creating the waves there right now. That's not that much. That's not even that significant, or maybe it's this big thing here. Probably that would be a steep north swell for California, but a northwest for Hawaii, because the waves are pretty big there. And then it moves down tomorrow. Looks like there's a little bit of weather and it's going to come really close to the coast. So what I'm looking at tomorrow is I'm flying into San Francisco, and what's really interesting is Moss Landing has a way different wind pattern than everywhere else. So Prunedale, this is the town where I grew up, call it Prune-tucky. So Elkhorn, I went to Elkhorn Elementary School. So Moss Landing's right here, pretty much smack dab in the middle of the Monterey Bay, and there's the Elkhorn Slough right here. So the bay is shaped in such a way when you pull back, you can see the winds are already north up here, but the valley here sucks the air in like this, so it's more likely to be offshore. It has a different microclimate than the north coast of Santa Cruz. And so light offshore winds, looks like it's going to be offshore all day tomorrow. So looks like I'll be surfing in Moss Landing tomorrow. Just probably get off the airplane and get Bryce a wetsuit in San Francisco or Santa Cruz and get down the coast. Maybe Santa Cruz if that's the case. And then Saturday morning, still have the same offshore flow. Let's see about the swell. Yeah, there's swell. There's this big old thing right here, pretty close, which is good for beach break. We'll be surfing mostly beach break, and yeah, you could just see the sometimes the wind patterns in San Francisco are the same, but not always. Let's see, going forward, looks like some light onshore, and this is really cool. Here you can see like this bigger storm out to sea, but there's just so much variation in this whole entire coastline that you have different winds all over the place, which is kind of wild. And then Sunday, this storm gets bigger, and the morning is going to start off calm. So we might get a morning surf with, let's see, southeast winds. Yeah, light southeast. So it looks like it's light enough. It could be harder than that, though. The south is like not the greatest wind direction for the whole entire area. It's hard on shore in Santa Cruz, but where you can go, and if this swell is big enough, and you'll see what I mean right here, is it's low tide in the afternoon. So I'm thinking of surfing under the Golden Gate Bridge, possibly Sunday night, Sunday afternoon. Low tides at like, you need a low tide. And you see the southwest wind, the wave breaks right here under the bridge. It's called Fort Point. And you see the southwest wind is offshore there. So like all of the winds that are good for surfing, and it's crazy, right? That swell gets in there. It comes straight, like west swell is really good. It comes straight in right there. So maybe I'll be posting some pictures from under there, but not if we're like surfed out, not if the morning is good enough in Moss Landing and we don't want to do the drive. And then Monday looks like that we got that light flow. So you could see where San Francisco's onshore, Moss Landing's offshore on Monday morning. So it was actually a big shock to me when I moved up to San Francisco, and I was like, oh, I'm waking up at 4. And then I'd wake up and just get onshore wind in my face. Because it's so different, right? This is just exposed. This is sticking right out here. And this is like, right, like so set in. And yeah, Bryce and Nelson were kind of freaking out by like the waves that are going to be produced by this swell, but it's not going to be that big. Honestly, it's really good we're going here and not to Southern California where it might be like incredibly small, and there are tons of options. So yeah, that's just a really interesting feature of this area where I'm from. And what's really cool is the Airbnb we got. So here is the North Harbor here, and this is the South Harbor. This is the commercial harbor, they call it. And this is where my sailboat was docked when I was growing up. And then this is like the main break with all the localism. There's another break right here. I mean, this is all beach break, but this one's more exposed and faces a little bit more west. And then on the other side, this is called the jetty, the opening and the dunes. And then this side is called the peaks. And my best friend's house is like right here. And we are actually staying on, I think that's Marina already. So we're oh, there's the river mouth. We're staying here in the Dunes colony, which is just down. And this is where we're staying right here. And it's private, like you can't access it at all. So nobody surfs down here. So if it's small, there's just A-frame sandbars all over the place. Gets pretty big. It's pretty exposed down here. If it's bigger, we'll have to go to the peaks. But it's just and yeah, the condo we're staying at's right here, like on the sand. So we're gonna
Nice.
wake up. We're gonna wake up and like be able to see what the conditions are like. And that's gonna be really good for seeing just what the conditions are like in this whole entire zone. So that is pretty cool. You can see all these little estuaries and a lot of water around here. Um, and there's Dolan Road. It's my best friend, Andrew Dolan. And there's the Elkhorn Slough. Yeah. So that's where we're going. And we can check the old surf line. Wow. Southern California got some good waves. I don't know what they're talking about. Port Fair. Looks like Costa Rica is good. Shocker. Yeah, so they're saying that there might be a wave Sunday here. I don't know how 0.7 at 10 and 3 feet at 4 from the northwest equals 2 to 3 foot, but if you guys are lucky, surf line might, and then here we saw Thursday, so they're calling it already. We'll see if it holds. Still got that strong flow going the wrong direction, but a little bit bigger from the east southeast there. Just for the hell of it, we can look at Costa Rica. Why not?
I saw a amazing wave that Andrew got
Yeah, and
on
Matapala.
Instagram.
Yeah,
That was Matapala.
yeah,
I thought it was awesome.
yeah. That's the same thing.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah,
But I never surfed Matapala, so I don't know what I don't really know that spot at all. So
so this is, Emma, like this is pretty common pattern for down there. Small, what is perfect, small and perfect for down there. And then I don't have Moss Landing on my surf line because there's no camera. Ocean Beach, looking chunky. So yeah, they're saying tomorrow is 8 to 10 foot and good offshore winds all day long. So definitely going to be just shooting down the coast and just getting down to Moss Landing. And then here's Sunday with this bigger swell and the southwest winds, definitely 4 point or dead man's for sure for us. So it looks like this is Ocean Beach, so they're calling it a lot bigger. Looks like the day we leave Tuesday's a nice small day. Maybe actually we'll surf San Francisco before we fly out, which could be cool. If I can find somewhere to put our things so we don't get all our shit stolen.
yeah.
So sucks there. Looks like we will probably be able to avoid Santa Cruz, which is good. No need to surf there. All right, so that's the surf forecast for both coasts.
Nice.
Looking better, a little better over there. It's pretty normal for me to go over there this time of year. All right, so book 7. Emma, did you read?
I did.
And Roger has
Yeah.
read 4.
Yep.
Yeah, and I reread book 7 very early this morning.
Great. Okay. And I read the beginning of book 7 out loud to Sophia over the weekend and finished the second half today. The cool part, the cave, the all important cave. That this is like the part of the Republic that is assigned, but it's really interesting because this time I'm really starting to see the way the books hang together and kind of the way that Plato's whole picture is being constructed, the way his picture is being constructed. Because it's the divided line that leads in to the cave.
Yeah.
And the divided line gives me trouble. And it's also this theory of like super sensibles, which leads to the theory of forms as well. Like there's a sound stuff and a sight stuff and a thing that makes a thing what it is, that like in our sensory perceptive organs are tuned to that, or potentially tuned to pick up that sensible thing, the musicality of the music, the colorness of the color, the redness of the red, the blueness of the blue. And something like this is still like at work in different aesthetic theories of philosophy, whether there is something like a super sensible, and plays largely into theories of consciousness and stuff and language as well, whether like a thing lends itself to what we call it, or whether and we dealt with that a little bit, with Dennett's meme theory, which is the opposite of super sensibles. It's I think somebody like Chalmers might buy something of a super sensible kind of argument. But we don't need to go that far astray. We can just stick to Plato. But the idea, though, is that if there was something like a super sensible or a formal essence to something, we would want to educate that part of ourselves that can behold it or see it as it is, right? So that's like this education that this whole text is about how, if you're going to have something like a more ideal, more just state, all of the stakes rest on the kind of education that you have. At least it seems to be saying that to me. You guys feel free to disagree.
Yeah, what's interesting is you have these various kind of attempts at the educational system, and then that are not all, they don't all hang together. Like he tries one way, and then you have a different system of education, a different approach. One is with the lie. One's very heavy on lies, and and then by the end of book 7, you have, you banish everyone over the age of 10, and
yeah, what was that? Like, send them all out into the country?
Yeah, it's like Pol Pot.
Yeah.
It's year 0. You have to start with just children, no adults. He's constantly shifting the ground of the educational system.
Yeah, I think that maybe he's just. I mean, I think that's one way to look at it, or you could look at it like he is, rather than shifting it, he's just like building upon, like he has something in mind, but maybe he's changing it, but he's like working up to, like it's an actual coherent argument that he already had. Like he's actually already thought of this political structure, and he's giving it to the interlocutors until like he's building them up for his thing that he already had in mind.
Mm-hmm.
Or he's trying out just different thought experiments on them. That could be the case, because some things remain consistent, right? Like that there would be women and men.
Yeah.
That's consistent. So there are definitely plenty of consistencies to the education. He never throws out gymnastics and music.
No.
Example, those stay central, because there's actually a real non-dualism of mind and body here, which is interesting to me, and
a lot of it is habituation.
Yeah. To hard work.
Yeah, to hard work, and building in this sort of rhythmical, harmonious habituation of body and mind.
Yeah, definitely. And you just can't, like, he wants something whole. So he wants, like, for lack of better words, like this holistic education. So I read the 10-year-old thing too as like they shouldn't know who he's really trying to get people out of the habit of ownership and private property, because this is a major source of injustice. And I think there is something really to be questioned in this kind of idealism, whether it is just, and I mean, this is a huge criticism of Socrates and maybe Plato as well, because we know that Plato, I mean, historically, Plato went to Syracuse to be the advisor to Dionysus, not a god, but a tyrant there. And he tried to kind of massage him and persuade him of these philosopher king ideas, and to mold him in this image of the perfect philosopher king, and it failed miserably. He ended up being enslaved there till his friends had to come and like break him out or bribe him out. I can't remember the exact historical events, what happened to Plato, but he did try this out. He did try to like get in the back door of philosopher kinging, actually historically in practice. So what I was going to say is that there is this people, it's just like basic tribalism. Like people feel this sense of belonging like immediately with the family unit. Okay, there's Fialka's having dinner. Enjoy your dinner, Fialka. Where there's this sense of ownership, so he's really he notices this. So when he's doing this thought experiment, he's like, as soon as possible, or as soon as, I think 10 is like what he's saying is like a moment, is like an age of consciousness, or year 0, like you're saying, to start with a clean slate. Like you can't have people similar to Ursula Le Guin's dispossessed saying my mom and my dad and my brother and my house and my clothing and my surfboard, my wave. All of this sense of ownership and entitlement to things that is singular and separate from the sense of it, so he wants to supplant that, or at least the theory is that in order for there to be this just city, and I'm gonna like also propose another side thought experiment that's definitely going on. The idea would be that everything works in unison and considers the good of the city the one thing that they're all entitled to and that they need to work for, because that benefits them the most, more than like having a dad, but that's, asking a lot of human reason to do these kinds of what I think he's rightly saying, like one could only come to at the age, I think we can be fair, like maybe 35 or so, you could get to some kind of diet. He's pretty conservative about when you get to an age and a training that you get wisdom, which is 50, right? That's when your knowledge is the most mature, most complete. And until then, you need this rigorous set of studies. And yes, this very, what some might view as fascistic communist regime or rule, where you're just learning for the sake of learning all of these skills and trying to get into these habits of thought and body so that you're prepared to do your part for the city when you're called upon, which won't happen until in the ruling kind of way, until you're of the age in which you've been thoroughly habituated to rule yourself. So that's what I was going to say, is one can also look at this text as something just for a person themselves as the city. So the body itself as multiplicitous unity, and that the body itself, health itself in an individual body, when looked at like a political organism amongst its cells and bacterias, works best itself in the way that he's suggesting that the city does, although the actors are not different conscious human beings with families and stuff. Although we could argue that we don't know the levels of consciousness of all of our cells and everything. And but I have been listening to a lot of podcasts about the microbiome, and that being actually a huge like seat of consciousness for us, and how important it is to our overall health, and how very much evolutionarily, when the stuff in there, like I think Dennett talks about with evolution really well, it does not care necessarily about the flourishing of your overall organism, those little gut microbiomes, whichever one you're populated by, only care about their own their own flourishing. So if you have the kind in there that like want fast food, they'll gear your whole system to feed them fast food. And they will take down the whole organism just to get McDonald's. And apparently those kinds, the kind that like McDonald's, are really hot. They like a super hot environment. So that's hence they create inflammation all over your body and like shut down all of these other systems because they need the internal environment to be so hot. So and that's just interesting to think of, like a colony or a faction inside of your cells, inside of your body, like working to do its best to get its, and there are tons of things in our whole, like we can look at our whole organism as this yeah, kind of a theater of war, I guess, you know, and allyship as well, you know, and things having to train your body and the cells, like cells you can't see. I think that's also interesting, this whole the pre-scientific scientific discourse about the real reality being the things that we cannot see. And that's also true for this metaphor / not metaphor of the body. Like our body has a host of processes, none of which we can see. And we have to go by these like feelings of like pain and wellness and you know, like we have to go by these vagaries to really understand like how everything is being communicated in there. There's only so much we can tell from looking on the outside of a body, like and genetics have a huge role to play in all of that as well. It's really fascinating. Like Sophia and I were saying the other day how, well, I'm getting a little frustrated at podcasters who, for example, are advocating, like they're trying to, you know, they have this really sanguine, skeptical attitude that like people just aren't going to eat well. They're just like, look, the bar is so low. We're here on this podcast, similar, you know, they're all people like ourselves that are like really into researching and science and literature and asking questions and doing dialectics. And some have a higher hope for humanity and others don't. Others are like, look, like we can't even get people to eat the standard food pyramid, which is like, okay. So why are we talking about optimal? Like what are we going to tell the people who are already listening to this podcast, like already bought in and they're the ones that already care. So why should we even try to convince the rest of the people to eat in this way? And then you have others that are trying to not hurt anybody's feelings and be like, if you want to be keto, that's fine. If you want to be this, that's fine. And they don't look at the larger implications, even for the internal factors of the body. So it's all external, like how you look, do you get the bulging muscles that you want? And we were talking about how even like some very thin people, because the cultural value praises thinness, that like they could be destroying the inside of their body to get the outer body to look that way. And they're not getting the signals, or maybe they are, but they don't communicate. They'd have to communicate them verbally or privately to their doctor, because the rest of us aren't getting the external signals that there's something wrong with their organism, you know, in the way that like people manifest, you know, like if somebody doesn't like being overweight and they gain weight around a certain area and they can see it and they're like, oh, I should really do something about that. Whereas somebody with like, let's say a higher metabolism is getting like crazy cardiac disease. They can't see the fat in their arteries, you know, and then they just drop dead of a heart attack, but they're like, but I'm so thin and I look so, you know, like I feel great, but like they can't see or even sometimes feel the plaque that's building up in their arteries. So, anyway, I think that those kind of conversations should be had with these podcasters when they're recommending that people just do what they want so long as it suits them. because there's very real things to take into consideration, which actually like brings us to this where I wanted to go, where we left off from last time. We wanted to talk about, Cassandra's not here, unfortunately, because she wanted to get in on this, about value relativism and what, like, you know, I'm always writing about truth being in this realm of tighter and tighter probability. And that's like the closest thing we can get. But when we get there, what do we do with that information, and how are we sure that that information that we've arrived at in that tighter range of probability, those statistics that we've come up with, are something that we can, you know, at least for a certain amount of time, act as though they're certain. Because there is certainty, and Plato talks about here too, how philosophy is dangerous for a certain kind of person where you're smart. He's like, these are very smart people. He's not calling anybody stupid. He's talking about the ways, you know, obviously he's also foreshadowing the own claims that will be put against him, which is, right, he was put to death for corrupting the youth.
Yeah.
So there is in book 7 a bit of a start of the apologia for himself. Or maybe it's an ex post facto. I forget the dates that Plato wrote these dialogues, but maybe it's an after the fact. Plato is like putting in Socrates's pre-apology apology for himself, plus the foreshadowing of the
well, there's the argument that the Republic itself is the true apology of Socrates.
That holds water. I mean, he's doing book 7 is the apology.
Yeah. And there's also this sense in which Plato is always indicting, sort of ironically indicting Socrates at the same time, because some of the descriptions of him, when he gets in that section when he's talking about the people who misuse dialectic, they're almost just, I mean, they're kind of descriptions of him too. It's like I wrote in the margin, self-portrait of Socrates as a puppy, you know, because that's what he's accused of, is making the worse argument look better, and contradicting and tearing things apart.
Yeah, but what he's also talking about though here, like if we talk straight about the text and this idea that people are sitting in this cave that has this, you know, it's like a play, it's a theater, right? The cave is a theater. In Badiou's treatment, he sets it in a movie theater. And there's a light. So this is actually, I mean, they must have had shadow puppets or something like that in ancient Greece. And there was a Deus ex machina. They had theatrical devices. So so this is also Plato describing something theatrical, right? Because that's always another kind of like meta narrative within the narrative, is about the narrative and about narrative structure. So, and we've already been talking so much about the way that stories are told and the different conventions that we believe about how stories go, and who the main actors of the stories are, and like what kind of values our heroes and our characters ought to have in order to create the best kinds of citizens, so on and so forth. But one also likes to make a distinction between metaphor and reality. And so the plays that we watch and that we put on can say a lot about reality. But like, for example, there are wars that are fought by naval aviators. Top Gun is not real. Like that's a fictional story that I'm sure certain things like that have happened. There have been characters like Maverick and Goose, but like that's not real. And then that's made by Hollywood for the purpose of lots of different cultural reasons and imparting certain kinds of cultural values and ideas about naval aviators and women and macho-ness and all friends and all kinds of things. So it's a really important distinction to know when you're like at the movies watching the movie that's a fictional film, and like you go outside of the movie theater and you're back in real life. That's like an important distinction to make. And then there is like, that's the one metaphorical level. And in the times of ancient Greece, it would be going to the theater and like hearing the stories and watching the plays and getting caught up in the drama and seeing all, oh yeah, that's just like me and my wife. We fight all the time like that. But you don't actually go and kill her. Hopefully, maybe you do. And we've already talked about that in previous things about whether the stories that we tell, we look at like the structure. I mean, we just think of even just the violence in our film industry. And whether that promotes a more violent kind of society. And so this idea of the reality being actually in what kind of reality is in the movie theater? What kind of reality is in the cave? Because it's a kind of reality. It's not the whole picture, because in this case, it's even more extreme, which is the people don't know that they're in the movie theater. So like they didn't even go to the movies. Their whole life is just in this cave, and everything that happens there is real. And they don't inquire further about the images at all. So Socrates, like every smart person in the history of humankind, is indicting, like Hillary Clinton once did, is indicting the deplorables who aren't that deplorable. He doesn't call them that. He does much better than her. But he is indicting a lot of people for just being okay with the status quo and not asking, why is that over there? Why is it not over there? He says that actually in this condition that most people are in, they're well, he's pretty extreme. He says their necks are fettered. So these people literally can't turn their head physically in this allegory of the cave. But he's going later to talk about the importance of habituation and of child rearing. And the reason why they can't move their head in the real life scenario of the allegory is because of the way that they've been raised, and because of the things that have been taught them, that they can't turn and look other different ways because they don't know to look that way. Similar to the people in the cave are ignorant of their chains. They don't know, they're not like, oh man, I really wish I could take this fetter off my neck. Or maybe there is some unconscious level in which they are trying to free themselves of that fetter. But we would need a different philosopher for that. So he is indicting his whole society as people living in a cave with fetters on their necks who think they're strong and brave. And he's like, you guys are just like staring at shadows dancing on a wall. And he describes a person who, for whatever reason, goes up and is like, oh my gosh, there's a light out here. There's like this whole other world. There's like stuff making these images. Like those are real in the way that they're real, and they're real for those people. But like, oh my gosh. And I think the way that he describes the two different kinds of blindness is super fascinating as well. The one kind of blindness where you've been in the dark for so long and you go out into the light and you're like, oh, and you can't see anything until you like adjust. And then you start adjusting and you start seeing what things are. And then your eyes accommodate to the light and to the forms they see out in such bright daylight, I would say. And then when you go back down, your vision is blurred again. We've all done this before, where you go like from the super light into a dark room. So and then it's very difficult to adjust to the darkness now. So there's a way in which also he is condemning himself. He knows his situation is fucked. The philosopher's fucked. He's like, it is great to go out here and turn the eye of your soul around, but it's going to be really hard to see once you go back into the cave again, and you got to go back down. There's no reason to stay out there and that I think is really great about, I'm just going to call it Socrates's speech in book 7, is this idea that he's always coming back down to earth, back down to the body. He even makes fun of Glaucon when Glaucon is like, and then third we study astronomy, because he thinks this hierarchical model of beholding what is best and what is most divine and most heavenly is always on this very literal vertical scale. Socrates is like, no, you're not getting it. If you don't apply it here, it's not like, where it's not Christianity. You're not doing all this to transcend and leave. You're doing all of this to hopefully, again, you get to pick, I think, or this oscillation between larger political structure, and ultimately that always fails. So yourself. And holding the parts of yourself in a harmony together. And then that's still in conjunction with the larger political project, because the more people that can hold themselves in a greater health for a greater amount of time, like an all the way health, in this Socratic picture, doing dialectics and sticking with your musics and gymnastics and geometry and abstract math. That's basically the prescription here, if he's being prescriptive. I mean, there is this whole fascist education program too, but I mean, he is stuck with that problem that like brought us all here, which is we found each other to have this conversation and to read Plato and to read the Republic, but it is very hard to go out into the world and like strike up a conversation with average everyday people about really questioning after why things are the way they are. That has been the case then and now. This is all to say that he's painting this picture of, he's gone outside and seen how things work. He can kind of see human motivations. He can see human blindnesses. He can see the way he himself is blinded by the light when he goes outside of the cave and has to come back in, and where he's going to try to describe everything he sees and how things are to these people who, even the ones that want to turn the eye of their soul around, have so much retraining and re-education to do that they're bound to misunderstand what he's saying. And then he's going to feel stupid because he's like, I kind of know all this stuff and I've seen all these things and I can see the way it hangs together, but none of it makes sense if I don't have interlocutors. And so I'm going to have to bring, like, without the dialectic, which is where really book 7 goes, without, that's the turning. That's what creates the motion of the turning. And dialectic, dialogos is just through giving accounts, through constant account giving. So it's not necessarily Hegelian yet. He really means actually social intercourse.
Well, I'm curious when you say it's not Hegelian quite yet, something I've been kind of just holding in the back of my mind through reading this whole thing is how he seems to be trying to hit this target of like, what is the right answer, and not allowing for the right answer to be that things need to unfold over time and go through phases of development, which made me think of Hegel and Marx and, their whole thing. And I wonder if am I misreading that? Like, do you think it is the case that Socrates or Plato is trying to get us to this place where like there's this static, perfect state of the world, that doesn't allow for fluctuation in a healthy way, or is
Well,
that
we'll get to that in book 8, where he talks about that none of this regime that he's building, he says, doesn't it won't last. Like even if you could build it, which you can't, even if we could make this, even if we could found this city in speech, if our prayer came true, he said, he says in so many ways, even if this paradoxical thing happened and the philosophers ruled, it would decay. It would begin to decay, and it would become something else, and we get into the cycle of states. So he does, I think, see that history, but I think that he's not actually trying to bring about this city in speech in the world. He's trying to demonstrate how you bring how you bring your Glaucon, your companion, to a vision of to a place of seeing clearly, of seeing the forms, of leading them to insight, leading them, turning the eyes of their soul. That, I think, that's what's really at work here, not trying to really put out a plan for society and progress in a Hegelian sense.
Yeah, and I meant also historically, because Hegel and Marx weren't around yet.
Yeah.
But I do think that like the answer to that question also divides interpreters. And there are all different kinds of nuances in the ways that some more and less famous philosophers have read these texts. I think also building the ideal city in speech speaks to a very real human urge to idealize, and to want answers, right? And to do this infinite searching and seeking, and actually to try to get again these tighter parameters of truth. Because the thing that, like I said, that we were going to talk about that we haven't quite hit on yet, which we should, is this issue of cultural relativism, because this is where it gets really the rubber really meets the road in cultural relativism, because we have to talk about some values that are transcendent of individual cultures. And so far, we have not, as a species, developed any kind of sound metaphysics or ethics where everybody can agree what these are so far. We do have things, we do have war courts, we have international codes of law that we have all somewhat agreed to,
Like,
kind of, but who are all of us when we're speaking of these things? And then even just in this, like Noel mentioned, and he's not here tonight, but got a shout out, Deb Gatak is obsessed with soccer, football.
oh,
And he follows the newsletter and was like, I can't be there, but I wish I was there to discuss this. He's enraged about Qatar hosting the World Cup. He's enraged about Saudi and Middle East oil, and that soccer is being used as this pawn for the big dick fights between the kings and Emiratis. Whoever can have the biggest soccer tournament or biggest soccer team is like better than the other guy. And so there's this argument that, well, the Daily, did anybody listen to the Daily on how Qatar came to host the World Cup? But the issues are, right, that they have laws against gay people, that they pay bribes to a bunch of different judges from a bunch of different countries to get this venue. It's too hot to play soccer there. That's why it's in December, not in the summer. And also COVID made the timing of the World Cup different, but mainly it's super hot there. It's a tiny little country the size of Connecticut. They're not going to have anything, like, what are they going to do with these huge soccer stadiums once this is over? and then the laws against alcohol and the way in which that they have some of the laws pertaining to Islam in their political constitution. And so, but they're the hosts, and now all of these global guests are going to their place to watch the World Cup, and there's bans on beer and gay fans and all of this stuff that supposedly Qataris are against. But where do you draw? But then it's soccer, which is transcendent of all of these things. And once the games start going, I'm like watching moms like crying in the stands because Lionel Messi scored a goal. And for that moment, when he scores, all of the, like, anything could, like, it doesn't matter. I like wrote to Deb, I was like, they could put the World Cup in Antarctica and everybody goes there full knowing that like the global impact of having the World Cup in Antarctica is going to like melt one half of the polar ice sheet down there, and they're still going to all go. We're all going to watch.
Like, it's also, did the Daily touch on this? Because I didn't listen to it, but it's like also in the background, FIFA is like basically an international criminal organization. Like,
yeah, exactly.
so there's there's that. And then it's just like the online discourse has been like create, like, it's almost like this Venn diagram of like, or I don't even know what kind of graph it is, where like my super lefty friends and like I don't actually have like crazy right-wing friends, but there's like people are meeting in all sorts of ways, and like people protesting, like the German team, or like some team protesting like the banning of the armband. Meanwhile, Qataris or whoever are being like, well, you guys were pretty racist to like our, like the Turkish team member, or like what, and it's just like a complete, I mean, it's just this bizarre finger pointing, and then people being like, well, the US has a record of human rights violations like that. So like we shouldn't, but it's just very much this, like, to me, yeah, like pure, like, honestly, cultural relativist, like, just like basically exploding and into like, I don't, discourse, and it's just been really.
Well, it is just now, like, I mean, there are very real wars, and there will be little fist fights and things that are fought over, and people will not be each other's friends forever again because of their disagreements about the Qatar World Cup. But it does make us ask like larger questions about, value relativism and tribalism, and to what extent like it's okay. And that's like the thing that we've also talked about in this whole, while we've been reading this book, is that Callipolis is not global. It's not even a nation. It's a city. It's a city-state. It is not meant even to take over the world. It has no designs of world domination or hosting major soccer tournaments. But the one thing that they're always certain about is that there will always be war. They do not,
exactly. That's exactly what I was going to say next. They have to have war.
They do not question the necessity of violence for keeping the city and for training the citizens. There will just necessarily be war. There will necessarily, on the body metaphor, like the immune system, like I said, like our bodies are this theater of war. And you have to identify somehow through all of this, and like so much of our work and research, as we've modernized our species, has been into how we arm certain parts of our bodies to fight. I mean, COVID, like we just had this like crazy war on a virus where people were sequencing our DNA and RNA and like finding the way that certain proteins bind to other stuff so that we could, we got vaccines so quickly. And what Socrates, I think, is describing here as part of turning the eye of the soul around and going out into the light is really just doing science. It's really just, I mean, for me, as somebody who really heavily studied the pre-Socratic philosophers, this is just Plato and Socrates leading up to Aristotle, coming from the pre-Socratic tradition of all the math and all the science. And this just shows you that philosophy and science should not ever be pulled apart from one another. They are not separate from one another. And yes, and neither should literature for that matter. This is math, science, and philosophy and literature all together in one problematic but wonderful, beautiful text.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, what's interesting is the presentation of philosophy in the Republic is in partially a presentation of a pre-Socratic philosopher, as opposed to in other dialogues where Socrates presents the characterizes philosophy very differently. It's not about the things in the air and the things below the world, below the earth. It's more about the hair and nails, fingernails and stuff in the market and the nitty gritty of human experience, or it's the demonstration of ignorance.
or it's about erotics.
Or erotics, yes, erotics, of course, in Symposium.
And Phaedrus.
And Phaedrus. And in this case, you have the most erotic man, Glaucon, being brought to a pre-Socratic view and a scientific view of philosophy, a mathematical view.
I actually just when he's addressing Glaucon, he calls him Hetaire at a certain point, which is an affectionate term for a lover. It's not eromenos, but like a hetaira is like a it's like the other woman. It's like a whore kind of another woman, not the man's wife. But yeah, I found that interesting. It was in the second person, and so he is like addressing Glaucon as a lover, and they're in the right age relationship to one another. Glaucon is probably late 20s, early 30s, and Socrates is this golden age at the time of this. He is old enough to put his money where his mouth is, and that he's over 50 or around 50 at this time when your education can be complete. And I like this too, though, about this text. I like how long the education takes. And I also really like that the acme, that's what acme in the Greek actually means the height, of your powers. That the acme of a human being is 50. As a 42-year-old person, I'm like, oh, that's awesome. I'm still it's not like everything then, but like it does seem reasonable that like you could be fairly intelligent by 50 years old. But that's like another thing too about like those kinds of things. This is what science is supposed to give us. And for him, the highest science, this is the point of the divided line, the smallest part, the highest part is the science of dialectics. So geometry, everything that will even become quantum physics, because that's what he's talking about. It's what it becomes. And actually on this question of change, Emma, he is pretty prescient when he's talking about why this other thing, we have to talk about the movement of bodies. He's like, no, we need to do physics before we do astrophysics. Basically, it goes basically like some kind of calculus, algebra, math, abstract math, geometry, which deals with very real bodies as they, for things like architecture and the practical applications, engineering, things like that. And then physics also, which will have practical applications. And then basically astronomy or astrophysics. And he's like, we can't do astronomy basically before we do the physics, because we need to know how stuff moves, because surely those things aren't just like sitting out there shining. Surely like the firmament is not just this like painting with these like dots, like whatever those are, it's operating according to principles of motion and rest. And so we do better to study those principles before we start studying the stars. And that is indeed what we continue to do. And we know so much more about the stuff out there. And the stuff that we've learned about the stuff out there has also taught us so much more about the stuff down here. And we still don't have the full picture. You know, there's no theory of everything yet. You know, we don't even know exactly how gravity works. That's something that, I mean, we know some of the classical laws, but we don't know like the larger laws. And what this quest after, what this scientific communal quest for the answers to these questions ought to do is work to bind us in a similar metaphysics so that hopefully more of our ethics will align. But it's never going to be, we're never going to get everybody on board with this project because it's just like too hard for everybody to like think about how particles affect their daily life, even though they do. Obviously, we're made up of them. So the thing that, yeah, science can do is create at least a system. It creates that system where we find the tighter ranges of probability. Like, there's no other system that does that because there's no other system that's math.
Which is kind of the fact that there's a serious, I mean, I don't know if this is true, but I think I perceive, or people have said that there's just like, I mean, the science education in this country is also, I mean, I guess education in general, right? That's like a huge, but it's interesting. Yeah. But I guess maybe, I mean, I'm just trying to tie like the sort of, if there is in fact a decline in just like science education to the like, but even just like a vaccine.
The problem in America is there's a detachment of the science education from the dialectics and from literature. That is not, Socrates is not proposing a STEM heavy
right. Okay.
curriculum for the purpose of capitalist gain.
Right.
He's not proposing STEM so that you can have a rich little kid that becomes a snotty little rich engineer or research chemist, or, you know, I mean, hopefully people find cures for cancer, but also what Socrates is saying, what I think he's saying and want to think he's saying and want to like Socrates for, is he's like, hey, you know, if you're worried about cancer, you might want to exercise first and eat a good diet, then go into a STEM field and do philosophy. Because if you are going into a STEM field and you're testing tons of fucking mice and you're mining shit out of the earth to further the human population at the cost of killing, of the trolley problem, of the cost of like, that's what's pissing me off about these other podcasts is like when they're like, pick your own diet, whatever makes you feel good. I'm like, why? Because the flourishing of one human being is more important than the planet. So like, this is your smorgasbord, pick your preferred diet plan without thinking about the like cosmic repercussions, let alone the personal ones. Like, I mean, putting my cards on the table, a non-plant-based ketogenic diet is terrible for both the individual human being and for the planet, and it only cares about justifying a masculinist need to kill and eat animals and to dominate the earth and to like have this like muscle man body for a short period of time for completely aesthetic reasons. Like, there's nothing good about that diet. It's all bad all the way down. It was developed, like, the whole concept of it, it's actually memes. It's back to Dennett. It's just fucking memes. These people are colonized by memes without questioning. And the memes, to bring Dennett, the memes are the fetters. And they don't, and just like that gut microbiome that wants McDonald's, they do not give a shit if your neck is stuck. They're like, I'm fine. I live here. Don't move. I like it here. If you move, you might dislodge me, and I like it here. and and people can't see, that's why I think that like there's a way in which Dennett's project is very Socratic. It's like ideally Socratic in the sense that like turning the eye of the soul around in the science of memetics is seeing the way in which these memes have founded these cultures and these tribalisms around which people have their rallying cries, and they're standing up for ideals that they don't even know how they got implanted in their brains. And it was the ideals and the memes that shaped them in their views, the way they feel that they're theirs. They feel like they own that. But until you can see the like vast interconnectedness, and again, like there's a pre-Socratic precedent for this, which I mentioned in Heraclitus, with the everything flowing. So this concept of eternal change is very present. And one can really look at Socrates, as Roger said, he is not only but he is the pre-Socratic philosopher, which is why Friedrich Nietzsche refuses to call them pre-Socratic philosophers. He calls them pre-Platonic philosophers.
Yeah.
Because he thinks that Plato is the one that really has the idealism, and that Socrates is much earthier, much more willing to accept change, and much more and I don't know if I accept Nietzsche's critique, because
Yeah, I don't know where he gets access to this
yeah,
original Socrates except through Plato and Herodotus and
right.
Aristophanes.
I mean, and I think in like the Nietzschean way, Socrates would be more Dionysian and Plato would be more Apollonian. So like making order and rules and not letting that kind of like robust beast out of the cage from time to time. Because, yeah, I mean, with that kind of acknowledgement of violence and eros, and that's the thing, that the dialectic doesn't have to contain it in a way that like it doesn't never get out of hand. Like we've already had it get out of hand, right? Thrasymachus has already been in, we've already had an example of somebody, and Socrates is always being threatened by a kind of violence, of political violence, because he so unseats, he's trying to show people like where their values are coming from, like back to this meme idea too. That's like, no, I just want to show you, like, and Spinoza does it, like really all of the great thinkers do it. They're like, you do believe in this way, and it is true that you believe in that way, but it is not the case that because you believe in that way, it's true for everybody else. What's true is that the beliefs become seated in this way. This is how beliefs become beliefs. And that's not value relative. So there is a place with processes that we can, and certain processes we have lower realms of probable certainty about how they work still. And others, we have tighter, like anything that we create, like when we hypothesize that you could probably fly a machine, we can do that. We can, we can do there are lots of things that we hypothesize that the laws of nature would allow us to do, that they do allow us to do. And that nature is like extraordinarily plastic when we figure out how it works. And then the stakes go up, which is why, again, the universities in America, and especially starting when we're small children. I mean, America, so the guy that translated, Alan Bloom, wrote a book called The Closing of the American Mind, which I've been listening to. And like, if you have any of those reactive liberal friends, just keep them as far away from this book as humanly possible. Seriously. But the American education system is not set up for neither a liberal nor a conservative open mind. We have an education system that privileges a closed mind under the auspices or under the idea is that America is the best and it has the best value system for everybody to follow. And we don't question our own value system. So we have nowhere baked into our own value system dialectics in the Socratic sense. Again, not in the Hegelian sense, not some like oscillation of poles between positive and negative, where the real thing appears in that back and forth, like on a larger metaphysical Geist level, but like on just the questioning the status quo, because the status quo in America, this is Bloom's argument, is embracing diversity and accepting all people so we have this kind of universal value of accepting universal values, but like we don't actually do that in practice. And we actually really educate our children to not ask questions. Why this? We punish our children. We punish our teachers. First of all, we punish our teachers. Teachers like live a punitive life in America. They're not celebrated people unless they unless they get there through the entertainment version of academia. And sometimes that's connected to very real, cool studies across all of the fields. Philosophy, we do have famous philosophers here who write amazing things, but we force them into the worst position of hypocrisy, and they all know it too. I mean, and nowhere is it as bad as everywhere. Sorry, I was about to say the new school, but everywhere's so bad. Like, it's not even fair to the new school professors to say that it's the worst, because everywhere's so bad. Like, I'm just saying, as an American trained in art, like the STEM thing really, the reason I went into philosophy and not into a STEM field is because like I saw my culture like so undervaluing a philosophical education. And that's what Bloom is bemoaning too, is like we teach science without ethics.
Right. Which is, I just it's just interesting because like somebody who, like I said, I did my almost through high school, but I finished high school here, but otherwise I was in France, and the French education system, I don't actually think trains you at all to ask questions or anything like that. But it's interesting to me that like, philosophy is like part of the high school. It's like required. And it's also on the, like, I guess it might be on the IB, on the International Baccalaureate here, but at the time it was just like the regular baccalaureate. And it's just like was a required part of your high school experience, and not like you just the nice high schools. Like I went to like a public high school, admittedly in the south of France, but still like it was. And it's just interesting because I still think that they're also not doing something right, because they're
teaching you to be French.
Yes, I mean, I guess there's a really parallel. Yeah,
it's nationalist education.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's very, I used to call it like fascistic education too. Like teachers are literally on a pedestal. Also, like you can't, there's no dialogue. I would say there's even less dialogue, but it's just weird that they also simultaneously like value other or like disciplines that we don't. Like I had never taken a philosophy course until I got to college because I missed, or like I accept like my intro ones in France. So it was just like, sorry, that was rambly, but it's just interesting because I can't think of like a really good educational system. I guess people talk about the Scandinavians, but
we don't have, there's nowhere in the world that has like an ideal one. Like it's, yeah, I mean, there can't be, there are probably better and worse schools and better and worse teachers, but so far the human race has not created, an super ideal education system. But there are some that, for example, look, the British, the English, French, German, Scandinavian, European education, even for Christ's sakes, like some South American education, like they privilege learning more than one language from a young age.
right, that's true.
Like, we would lower the bar to not everybody speaks English and we should force them all to speak English. Although a lot of those people, their second language is English. But that's
You know,
their
our attitude is like the Athenians. Well, of course you should speak Greek.
Right.
You know, like otherwise.
yeah.
Totally.
You
But
know, if you don't speak Greek,
You're a
barely
barbarian.
human.
Yeah.
but but then there's the argument, right, that like the point of education is actually, or the point of like a educational system, like a government sponsor, whatever, is like not to ask questions. It is brain. I mean, there is that whole
Totally.
argument,
I
which
mean, that's also why though the Callipolis would fail. Because
Right.
if you're raising a whole race of philosophers, like
Exactly.
you're not gonna comply.
Yeah.
Somebody's gonna be like, I went out there and saw the sunlight too, and I think that we could be doing things a little bit differently.
Right.
I want to like have Christmas with my mom and my dad so we can have some like light capitalism, some compatibilism.
Right.
And this is going to get like where the value relativism goes is to the issue of freedom and determinism as well. So whether it is ever possible for somebody to do otherwise, or to what extent do the laws of nature, the laws of genetics, the laws of trauma compel you to do things? Are you not free? And to what extent should you have responsibility for your actions? And that gets into issues, very quickly of capital punishment and just how we enforce laws and which laws we, again, we're back to laws, which is where we should, always kind of come back to. And again, that's with science too, is we're still trying to figure out all of the laws that hold in nature and what constitutes nature and natural, where the nature technology divide is, and like just asking these questions after where, how can things be done, like not utopian ideally, but like more ideally with like, I think there are some good guidelines in this text, like going for like less harm for more people. That's reasonable. That's a reasonable goal. It's not that we're going to get that all of the way, because I think that what's being really accepted here is how tribal people are. But yeah, I mean, for me, to my detriment, I turned away from like doing math and science just because of the way I felt overvalued in American culture. And it was science for money and for power, not for knowledge. It didn't seem like I wasn't getting messages from my culture that it valued science as applied to like, okay, once we know all this stuff about particles and how the human body works, and then how are we going to design an education system and a politics to cohere with that, which is philosophy.
Right.
Those two things should never have ever been separated.
No, you learn about derivatives to go and like you learn about math, calculus, and to go into hedge fund, like to go into finance. Like that's like the
Yeah. I actually when I was in undergrad, I originally majored in aerospace engineering, and a lot of my professors were also working in, for weapons manufacturers of different sorts, because that's, how you make the
What
money.
one does, yes.
And so they would adapt, the assignments that we were receiving as like 19-year-old children, effectively, were basically scaled down versions of whatever they were working on at work. So I remember getting assigned these like absolutely heinous, like bone-chilling weapons that like there was no, just like talk about like divorcing the philosophy from the science. There was absolutely no room for like, hey, should we do this thing? Is this what we should be doing with a room full of like bright 19-year-olds? It was just like, okay, like do the derivatives, do the calculus to figure out how to make this death machine work. And it was, yeah. So I actually dropped out like at a certain point for that reason
Wow.
Yeah.
and switched to philosophy, which
Did you? Is it your undergraduate major?
yeah,
Wow, that's so cool.
yeah.
Oh, and that's why, though, this return to Plato is different, though, because you're not an undergrad anymore.
Yeah, and also the program I was in was very, I realize this now, is like very mathy, like the
Mm.
kind
Right.
of, I think you said it
Analytic,
really well
like the
when we were,
analytic tradition where they're like showing the syllogisms and talking
just kind
about
of like,
Turning them into formulas.
problem and naming all of the
what's that,
problems.
Roger?
I said turning them into formulas. So we, I mean,
Yes,
we
exactly.
could, we
Yeah,
could,
it
we
was-
could diagram all the arguments and then express them in mathematical logic.
yeah, yeah,
So that we could do
exactly.
what Socrates is saying we shouldn't do,
Yeah,
which
Yeah.
is, you know,
and we can find all the invalid arguments.
yeah, and he's saying too, I mean, this is again, this book 7 is is the other apology. He's like, look, these kids, they're really smart, they're rich families, we're going to teach them all of this logic, and what are they going to do? They're going to go out all smarty pants into the world and make people feel stupid and like confuse them with these sophisticated rhetorics, and that's not the use for this stuff. Like, and then the philosophers are going to get a bad education because we're the ones that taught them how to do these logical things. And then the teachers are the ones that are going to be condemned for corrupting the youth, because now the kids are being smartasses to their parents. They're creating disorder in society because they're, you know, like disrupting the social order and like making old men who should just be venerated for their age feel stupid when they should just be left alone. And or
Don't let them get a hold of arguments at too young an age.
no, or I mean, look,
Yeah.
we have to say it because I promise we talk about it. Sam Bankman-Fried.
Oh yeah.
I mean, they're smart enough to figure out like financial systems in such a way to move money over here and move money over there, like it's Plato, not Plato. Anyway, and
Man, you have no idea. We had a $4 million grant from one of his foundations that just went poof.
Oh my God.
well, I have a small idea because I have money in Bitcoin, and I won't touch it though. I'm not touching because like I'll give my piece, which is I do think that the blockchain, like I'm not a government conspiracy theorist, so like I think the banks could fail again though too. I don't think that banks in the market, just because there are these laws with these corrupt governments, are any safer than the Bitcoin. It's just the Bitcoin is a financial tool that also crashes. So if Bitcoin had claims that it was invulnerable to crashes just because it was having a high moment, well, welcome to the world of human imagination and emotions, which is the world that human economics lives in.
Mhm.
And the stock market could also not exist. We don't have to own companies in this way. This is, again, just convention. That, yes, what the companies have real value because they make real goods and there are real people running the companies, but we don't have to be part share owners of these companies. There doesn't have to be a global market that works that way. It doesn't have to work that way. It has worked that way for about 100 years, and it has crashed many times. I mean, the whole way the market works is this little mini crash and boom. That's like, that's how they work. Like, you know, and the people that game the markets like make money on their volatility. And as our technology has advanced, they've become more volatile because we have more tools for measure. People are trading on the microsecond. So there's that really good book by what's his name that's written all of those. He wrote like Moneyball and
Michael Lewis.
It's short. Yeah.
Yeah, The Big Short.
He's writing the Sam Bankman-Fried book too.
Smart guy.
He was there. He was in the Bahamas when it
course
all
he was.
happened.
There he was, of course.
He
And
was
look,
right behind that little fern tree, that little fern in SBF's office.
and honestly, like the Fed, Janet Yellen, these people, like the fuddy-duddies that are like, we need more regulation on this. Like, this has just happened with other financial instruments. Oh, like it's not. Anyway, I think that too many people believe in it now. Its technology exists. It's not going to be wiped. Like it might change a little, also the stock market has been regulated and deregulated and hyper regulated and deregulated again a gazillion times. They write different kinds of laws, and then some shyster finds their way around those laws and finds, and then they write a new regulation, and there's this constant tug of war with these instruments of value. When I first found out about Bitcoin, I was essentially right. My dad was trying to teach me about it because my dad's like he's a Trumpy conspiracy theorist, and I'm a philosopher, and I'm like, so you're telling me the value is there's no value, it's just people want it to be an alternate form of currency that's not government backed because they don't trust the government, and they're on the right and the left, and they don't trust the government. And then he's like, it's not exactly that. And he'd like send, and I'm like, it's exactly that.
It's exactly that.
You were trying to confuse me, and I was smarter than that. I'm like, I still was stupid enough to invest in it now. And now the money is not all gone, just mostly gone.
Yeah. Bitcoin is the idea of capitalism. Bitcoin is the Platonic idea of capitalism. It's an essence of capitalism. It's a purely speculative essence. It simply is like a turbocharged version of speculative securities.
Yes, that sounds right.
It just amplifies all the other tendencies, which is why you can make so much money off of this stuff, or
Right.
lose so much.
Saw a tweet that said if Michael Lewis is following you around for a book for a few months, you should probably take that as a bad sign.
It's funny, but no, my brother made GameStop money.
I mean, I made more money than I've lost at the end of the day. Like you forget the money that you made because you already spent it.
Right.
If you didn't reinvest it, but I needed it for some stuff on the Costa Rica property at the time, and that is what it is. And for Roger, who has been to Costa Rica, and Emma, who is going to Costa Rica, and Fialco, who's been to Costa Rica, guys, I got a stove installed in the kitchen. No.
A new stove?
Yes, a stove you can
Oh,
turn
you
on.
didn't have a stove.
Yeah, remember
That's
we're
right. That's right. You had to cook
I mean,
outside.
I know
I
the
didn't
food-
even
I know-
notice.
I created this illusion. The food is amazing, but we cooked it all on the barbecue.
Right, I forgot. Yeah.
And we have done for like basically 6 weeks, for as long as I've been running retreats at that property, our kitchen stove has been broken.
Well, that's exciting.
That's a real thing. The kitchen stove now works. The retreats, the food was always good. I can cook amazingly on the barbecue, but for me, it's way less of a headache that I can cook in the kitchen now, where near the sink
Yeah.
and the food processor and the bowls and everything. And anyway, that's a real value, that a real upgrade that some Bitcoin. I mean, so it is the essence of capitalism, but like once enough people believe in a thing to make it a norm, it becomes a real thing.
Yeah. It's just as real as any other currency in a way. It's just more volatile. It's just a security without a company, right? It's a security that's based on nothing other than value.
Well, it's actually based upon the energy.
Well, yeah, the energy used to mine the Bitcoin, which is purely arbitrary.
Yeah. And people, and actually you can find, I read a really good article about this a while back. People that figured out hacks on their power bills were giving you like better value for whatever kind of like cryptocurrency that they were creating, because they were able to create it for cheaper because their power bill was less. So that's like, you know, very, very real. Like also the weed is going to be cheaper outdoors because the sun is a lot less expensive than hydroponics.
Yeah.
It's also going to be a lot weaker, the weed. And probably at the end of the day, the only kind that you should really be smoking if you're still smoking weed. But which like definitely don't want to, I put in a good 30 years of weed smoking. So that is, I did my time. I did my time as a stoner. And I did a lot of philosophy through being massively high all the time. But it is just crazy now that it is that weed is so legal. I mean, again, here there's a plant, and think about all of the other plants that we decide this one's legal, that one's not legal. Think about the pharmaceutical industry and like all of the norms and laws and not laws that we have around the regulation of substances and quote unquote what constitutes abuse and not abuse, and like who's the one to regulate these systems, who gets to like be the big boss of this kind of regulation.
Yeah, I mean, it's changing. Like the hallucinogenic stuff is like, I mean, it's been changing. It's changing like as we speak. It's the norms around that.
Well, yeah, I mean, and then it's all tied into the class race stuff, especially in America and the criminal justice system or lack of justice system, and having to like, I mean, and these people have already fucking like done 10 years for marijuana possession. Like, yeah, you're getting them out of prison now, but you ruined their life over weed. Yeah. And like part of that is because they were the wrong place in the wrong time, the wrong color with the weed, you know, and that's not the whole problem, but like it was also the government's relationship to what it considered a drug. And so there was something to do with weed itself too, not just their social situation. But all of these things and seeing, and, you know, and again, like to bring it back to the text, like this is what Plato's saying dialectics is. It is seeing all of these connections, or Socrates. Yeah. Socrates is saying dialectics is. And that, I mean, I do like, you know, I'm coming to like Socrates even more as I read this text, and even in his, even when he's being ridiculous. And that is what is lovable about him, is when he is, because we can see that in ourselves as philosophers too, when we want things to be ideal so much and we become calcified and rigid in our, like, I have this really great idea for like the ideal society. Like, oh, right, that's fascist.
Mm-hmm.
If only people would just do everything like the way that I do, it would be perfect. And then you think like, oh no, then you know, then, but it's the talking through and the being able to see like somebody brings up a different perspective, and that's, you know, more important. You know, I think that is really cool that like he's like, yeah, STEM is super important, we couldn't live without it, but you have to do ethics. I have an uncle who is one of the top guys at Kaiser. And it's so funny the way in which, so he's my dad's younger brother, the way in which they're both conspiracy theorists on different sides of the spectrum. and also radical narcissists. And John, my dad is Richard and my uncle is John. And John is so like self-important, and he goes to all these conferences. Like he teaches at that Singularity University. Have you heard of that, Roger? Yeah. And he like really idolizes all these young Silicon Valley types and Elon Musks of the world and things like that. And he goes to all these conferences and talks about all these new great things and these new great drugs and these new great, and I always say, John, how many philosophers were at that conference? He's like, well, there weren't any. And I was like, your conference was worthless.
I would love to. I would love to be a fly on the wall in those dinner table conversations.
Oh man, I mean, I love my Uncle John, but like, we definitely have this like sparring of the geniuses thing that goes on. But even my aunt, who's super sweet, Mindy, she's just like, you just don't understand how smart your uncle is. He's just so smart. And I'm like, have you seen his garage? That is not a sign of radical intelligence to me. You have to have rooms in your house where he's not allowed to, he's a hoarder. And so she has like specific rooms, like her office. She even has her own mini fridge that he's not allowed to touch. And that comes from, he's a baby boomer, right? So like that comes from like scarce. I don't know. They didn't ever live in scarcity. So I don't actually know where it comes from. I think maybe if I were to psychoanalyze, it probably comes from a relationship to my grandfather and to love of the father. And that's like a whole other thing for thinking about Plato and Socrates and this Greek tradition in this the male erotics of fathers and sons is, you know, just a whole different kind of lens to look at these things through, which anyway, it just makes me think of this thing that Sophia sent me from one of her readings in psychoanalysis school, where this analyst was talking about his patients, and he says, you know, when the mother abandons the child, somehow the kid can find a new place to love the mother, or never like really, like the hatred for the mother can be resolved. Where when the father is like a terrible abuser or left the family, it seems in most cases irreparable. The kid is always like, you know, never can, and it has something to do with like the bond. It has something to do with the bond of the mother, but there's this really interesting thing when one is crossed or wounded. And on the flip side, when one gets like the proper kind of love from the father figure, that changes the way that their psychic structure is constructed into their adult life, which is plot. I mean, I'm just thinking that in the context of this text, where you have soccer, you have like a culture where there is so much more like connection between fathers and sons, it seems. And like a care, like a real, like, yeah. It's not, it doesn't seem like the divorce boom has really hit really big in ancient Greece at this time. Because it was just a duty, like marriage, you know, and filial piety was still a real thing. But that's something that Socrates very interesting in this regard, in terms of his liberalism with the abolishment of private property and parents, and that you should be a parent to like all of the society, and like kind of an old school respect your elders kind of conservatism, and that it really uproots, like in terms of an intransigent social value that is not, that when it breaks culture, like that the real harm is done, is this respect of older people. It seems to me that like there is a lot of messaging in here that when young people stop respecting older people, society gets turned on its head. Not so much male, female, but really this respect for age and respect for the wisdom that is accrued. Even somebody like Cephalus, you even in the whole dialogue starts with even treating Cephalus like you should treat most old people. Tell me what you know, because you've clearly lived longer than I have. So even if like you have some funny ideas about which gods you worship and so on and so forth, the social norm that I ought to respect is that you're older than I am and you've been on the planet longer than I am. So even though I'm a precocious young person, or because I am a precocious young person, I should ask you more questions than tell you how things are.
It's like the opposite of, because we dispose of old people because it's not compatible with like our capitalistic, like they have no value under like our current system. Like, and wisdom and knowledge is not something that we can monetize. So there, or I mean,
We can. It's just more, I don't know. I don't have a good word for it.
but I guess, yeah, I guess I just like, I just often think about how we just don't, I guess there's like a youth obsession and there's like a value on like an anti, like a negative value to age, I think.
How do you feel about this, Roger?
So
Yeah, it's true.
How do you feel it as, I mean, I will just say you are older than at least the people on the screen here. Not sure, you and Fiolka might be a similar age. Have you guys talked about that before?
Yeah.
No.
No, oh, there she is.
Well, it's interesting. It's interesting. I mean, especially in my line of work, I'm an old timer. Like I've been a journalist now for 25 years. Like I'm a survivor. There aren't that many of us, you know, like we get weeded out. It's a very youthful industry, and
how do you guys get weeded out?
well, exactly. I think it's just a really hard way to make a living. I think a lot of it is voluntary. People drift into other lines of work. But my cohort, people I came up with in magazines, like there aren't that many of us left.
what is a magazine? No, I'm kidding.
No, I mean, I feel the same way. I left print a long time ago. So yeah, it's definitely, it's interesting. At the same time though, I do think that my relatively young staff respects my experience, at least in my face.
I guess, yeah. It's interesting.
I feel like there's a funny dynamic around that where many young people that I know and observe do respect their elders, like in practice. And at the same time, obviously, you know, we live in this like toxically youth obsessed culture. Like, and I can't really reconcile that.
Mm-hmm.
But it does seem to be true that like both of those things are actually happening.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I've seen it in surfing culture. Especially like, but surfing culture is, it's actually, it's also, both of the things are the case too. In like you're saying, you know, and in different places, there have to be the old people still in the water, in order to like see that, in order for them to be visible. And then it just makes so much of a difference whether they're older adult beginners or whether they're older, like been surfing since the 60s. And then, because then there you have multiple factors at play, like respecting them for their age on the one hand, and then respecting them for their experience and their expertise at surfing on the other hand, which like they don't always go hand in hand. But there's a way in which even if they, let's say, are less expert, that you still like, I think, ought to respect them for their age and the way that you approach them or talk to them, like if they did a bad thing or were did something dangerous or something like that, like you should not probably yell at them like they're stupid good for nothings. Like they could be like grandparents, like done a lot of things in their lives. They just are happening to take that happening. They just happen to take this one up. And then in the sponsorship realm, this is really changing in like the professional realm. And this is happening in a lot of sports in general, is just like pushing the threshold of like how long you can actually compete at the sport, like what constitutes too old. This number is shifting radically right now, both how good you can get from such a super young age. Basically, we're just stretching athletic prime backwards and forwards so far with with all the stuff that I'm kind of, getting obsessed with right now. Makes more sense to be obsessed with it, I think, in middle age when you're like staring down the barrel of old age. But for younger people that want to be more conscious of like how their body is performing and aging, that's really cool for them to get into, to start optimizing health and fitness at a younger age, because like they can have like a longer athletic career if that's what they want. But I was going to say on the financial side, surfing preyed, because surfing's so highly aesthetic and relied on images, that it preyed on young people whose parents were, and I think a little bit still does, whose parents are footing the bill. So the sponsors don't pay the adult people that need to pay their bills. Instead, they give free clothing to children who think it's so cool to get free clothing, which it is when you're 10, totally awesome. And put the stickers on their surfboards, because like kids like that kind of stuff, because then they look like their sports hero. So then you're like, one top paid guy or girl is doing their job as the top paid pro, getting these little kiddies like hooked on idolizing them. And then the kid wants to be good, and then they're free advertising for your brand, and they're super cute, and they get the other kids into it. And then you're not paying adults. And then the minute they turn 18, you drop them to sponsor more 10-year-olds. So this has been a model in the surfing world. And then the kids go through this crisis, like puberty is a crisis anyway. But also then they've been trained as athletes with no educational background, a lot of them, not all of them. And then they're 18 and have like, there's a gazillion other amazing 18-year-olds, and not all of them have sponsors. And I won't even get into the whole gender politics of it, because that's the another side of it. But then you have people like surfing better in their, free surfing better in their 40s and 50s than they ever surfed in their 30s, and they're not getting sponsored. Because they're not necessarily doing the contest anymore, or talking about what the age. And then on the gender scale, though, obviously women age out of professional careers sooner than men do, because our cultural value for like what constitutes feminine beauty is like more obsessed with this usefulness. Where like, if this is the case, like in like standard fashion and modeling too, where women, interestingly, on the whole, get paid more as models than men do, and there are more female models than male models. But there are more older male models than older female models. That whole Roger look, the like salt and pepper beard guy. I have like actually a bunch of friends that do that kind of modeling. They're like well into their 50s and getting paid to pose for Banana Republic catalogs or whatever. And that kind of older masculine ideal, aesthetic ideal, is more alive in the culture. So yeah, it's really interesting, the sports and aging. And then you do have like, little kids in surfing that like, yes, some older people are slower and they paddle, and the kid is faster, and they paddle, instead of like waiting their turn, they paddle around the older person and are not paying attention to whether they're like an old long time local at that spot, and whether they've been waiting their turn. And like, just because they're slower and just because you can paddle around them doesn't mean that you ought to, like, give the guy a wave, and then he will be like, also like Cephalus, like, older people are satisfied with less. So it's only going to take that old guy like 3 to 4 waves to be as satisfied as the kid who can take like 30 of them. But when you have the culture privileging the kid and giving him free clothes and telling him he's the best, go out and take everything you want, that's like giving a wrong-headed view of like the way that they should deal. This is like an issue of entitlement. And that, yeah, so that's really interesting, the way that the way that age is talked about and viewed in this text as actually a non-relative. I mean, this book is not about cultural relativism, though. This book is about being able to see, or if it's about cultural relativism, it's about understanding the norms of your own culture. So when you go outside the cave, you can see things as they are, which is how the norms get constructed, right? The norms in the cave get constructed by the light shining on the figures that go on the screen, that the people, and then they are perceived by the people in the fetters. So that's how the norms are constructed. So that is the knowledge that you have when you go outside of the cave. You can see that it can be otherwise, and there are other tools that are actually the light itself, for example, that can furnish you with information about reality to construct new norms. But for the time being, you're the one that went outside, you're the minority. You have to go back to the majority where you know how the norms were constructed. So you shouldn't be so stupid to go back down into the cave once your eyes can see again, to go down there and tell them that like all their norms are fucked, because you've seen how they're constructed, and you also see these people are constrained in certain ways that they can't take. You can't just blast light into their eyes. So this is where reactive liberals go wrong all of the time, whether it's actually even the case whether they saw the light. But this is also where it's asymmetrical, where like, if seeing the light is that they desire for less harm to come to more people, that is a good and noble desire. But you do not achieve it by shining flashlights in the faces of people who've been sitting in a cave for 5 million years.
Wait, just so I catch it, what can you give what's an example of a reactive liberal?
Somebody that would scream at somebody who, like, they perceive them to have a conservative view, let's say, and that they get so frustrated with them that they would say something like, you just don't see this, it can't be like this. Even if their point is right? Like, even if it's that the criminal justice system is fucked, that people have historical trauma, that we need to make reparations, etc. It's like very logical things, but the delivery and the person they're delivering, like, that's what's not logical. So like, their historical argument holds probably a lot more water than whatever kind of argument the other person could furnish. But the way that it's their argument is to be culturally sensitive, and the delivery is not culturally sensitive to the person they're delivering it to. Mm-hmm. So if the goal, and one would have to assess whether this was the goal, was to attempt to turn the eye of the soul around of this person who's been in this cave with their neck fettered forever in the darkness. And is it fair that the person who's gone out and seen has to adjust their life? So look, the work that this person has to do is double, if not triple, if not quadruple, if not quintuple the work that everybody else has to do. Because you got to keep adjusting your light to all of the different, your eyes to all the different realms. Unlike the people that just go outside, the monks, the mystics that go off and they're like in the realm of eternal light and they don't ever return back to humanity. That's not the path that Socrates is suggesting. He's not suggesting mysticism. That's not altruistic. it's not good for society, and it's arguably not right. Because there's nothing, there's a pragmatic interpretation of the cave allegory, which is the whole reason to learn things as they are is to help other people see. And if you don't do that with your wisdom, it was all for naught. You worked in vain. And so when you're dealing, if you're trying to persuade somebody who's intransigent, you can push them deeper into the cave. You could leave them where they are, or you can search and search and search and maybe never come to some type of way of persuasion. But there are certain methods that will push them deeper into their position.
Mhm.
I mean, it's a perfect description of our politics right now, where you have a kind of social justice zealotry that in its zeal is making the people that it should be trying to bring along more and more racist, because there's a reactive formation going on, and you can see it. Like, I mean, I went home to Texas recently, and I spent for my father's 80th birthday, and I spent the whole time I was there trying to deprogram him, because for the last couple of years, he's just had Fox News going the whole time. And he used to not be that way. He used to be very reasonable about politics. We could have long, reasonable discussions. He was more conservative in most respects than I was, but we could have legitimate discussions. But he was just repeating Fox News talking points. And I could have, at earlier point, I mean, at other times in my life, I would have just yelled at him. We would have had fights, and it would have made it worse. And my sister was there as well, and she was trying to just have us not talk about politics at all, because she's very conflict averse. But I decided, kind of in the spirit of Socrates, very consciously, to try to sort of tease out the contradictions, and it was unbelievably exhausting. But I think, but we didn't fight and we didn't yell at each other. And although I know my stepmother got very upset with me at times, we never had a fight the whole time I was there. We had some pretty intense discussions, but it could have been incredibly ugly. I could have, if I had gone in there feeling right. I mean, if Trump were still in power, I think I was still like spending all day, editing stories about the Muslim ban and things like that. I don't think I would have had it in me to try the epicoge, to try to turn the eye of his soul. But I don't think I succeeded, but I think I made him think a little. And he even sent me a note afterward. He said, really enjoyed the conversations. You gave me a lot to think about.
Wow.
That goes with my fathers and sons thing. I mean,
Yeah.
like, we have this, it's a weird genetic thing also, like, to get along with our dads, which is why it is like such a what's it called, a betrayal, when, like, on the larger political scale, like when the leader turns his back on the people and or says, I'm going to get you all this good stuff, and then punishes you, it's very difficult to like recover from those kinds of betrayals. And why it's still such an important issue to figure out. And it can be, we don't need male rulers only. But yeah, there's actually a really interesting show on Netflix called Borgen. Sophia loves watching all of these Scandinavian dramas about the issues, like the very particular like issues that female rulers face, right? So, you know, and managing their home life with like ruling and these really rock in a hard place decisions they get in, because it deals with the Danish controversy around Greenland.
Mm.
And anyway, but I'm glad that I think that way is therapeutic as well. I mean, I think the dialect, this is the way in which dialectic in the Greek sense, again, not the Hegelian sense, talking it through. I mean, I think Socrates' dialectics looks more like psychoanalysis than Hegel or Marx. It looks more like remembering, repeating, and working through than it
Well, and
does.
also it's happening on the level of the individual psyche, as opposed to this concept working itself through culture over time with you know, this whole idea of this march of the concept, march of the idea through history.
I have to march myself to bed.
I'm surprised I made it this long. This is
No, I know. I
nice.
have to go. I mean, I'm only going to sleep I'm flying to California in the morning,
Oh,
but
that's great. Yeah.
uh
Have fun.
I'll
Yeah,
sleep
have a
on
good
sleep
trip.
on the plane. I've made a mafuki to go before the call. All right, guys, this is a really good one, actually.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank
And
you. Yeah.
yeah, I maybe try to aim for next Thursday for book 8. I'm gonna bring it with me, and then Roger can recite all of the different ways we can rule our bodies.
Hope you feel better, Roger.
Yeah, feel better.
Oh,
Thank you. Thank you.
Good
Thanks,
night.
Bye.
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 Bye.